Finally, a formal welcome to the second of the Transport Planning Society's Transport Planning Day events for 2021. In case you didn't join us for the first session, I'm Mark Frost. I'm the current chair of the TPS, Transport Planning Society, and I'll be looking after and comparing proceedings for this afternoon. So we are the Transport Planning Society, the professional body for transport planners in the UK and Ireland. And this session is the culmination of our Transport Planning Day campaign for 2021. The theme of which is around equality, diversity and inclusion. So far, this campaign has been, I think, great success. We've had 8 very varied live events leading up to and including today, covering subjects as diverse as best practice and equalities impact assessment and assisted technology, through to a full and frank debate around the tensions between accessibility and inclusion and sustainability. We've had over 1,500 delegates on those events across the last 6 months. And those have been complemented by 13 original blogs provided by members of the TPS board and other friends and associates. And that's just TPS. It's been great as well to see that a great number of other consultancies and public sector agencies have also embraced Transport Planning Day and have celebrated it via their own events, of which pub quiz seems to be the #1 thing that people have done. So I think that might just be a sign of post-lockdown fatigue there. In this session, we're going to find out how transport planners can work to make the system inclusive and accessible for all. In the last session, we talked a little bit about how the transport planning industry itself needs to reflect and improve the amount of diversity in amongst both diversity of thought and also actual diversity in amongst our sector. And that session will be available for you to view on YouTube, and I'd strongly encourage you to do so. Before I introduce our guests, I'd like to encourage our attendees to put any questions they have for the panelists in the chat. We will be dedicating as much time as we can to Q&A towards after each of the different presentations, and we'll endeavour to answer as many of your questions as possible. We'd also welcome you live tweeting throughout the event using the hashtag TPDay2021. And we'd love to hear your thoughts as we go through that session. And I'm told that we did momentarily trend on Twitter, so let's see if we can get ourselves back up into that top spot above EastEnders or whatever is there at the moment. So I'd like to introduce our speakers for this session. Firstly, our keynote speaker is Emma Ward, Director General for Roads, Places and Environment at the DfT. Welcome, Emma. Emma will be joined by Jessica Matthew, the Co-Director of Local Transport, who leads on accessible and inclusive travel. Welcome, Jessica. And then next up, we have 3 speakers from Jacobs, who is a gold sponsor of TP Day, Richard Sanderson, Sharon Francis, and Katie Pearce, who will be talking about gender in transport planning. Many of you will have seen that we were hoping that Lord Blunkett was going to be in attendance this afternoon, but unfortunately he's been called away on some urgent business in the House of Lords. So unfortunately he's not able to make this session, though he has agreed that he'll come and join us at a future TPS session, as he has a very particular interest in this topic. So without further ado, I think I'll hand straight over to Emma for a keynote address on this topic. Emma, over to you.
Thank you so much, Mark, and thank you ever so much for inviting me to speak at this year's Transport Planning Day. As you heard, I'm Emma Ward. I'm the Director General of Roads, Places and Local Transport at DfT, and I'm joined by my colleague Jessica Matthew, one of the Directors of Local Transport at DfT, but with specific responsibility for equality, diversity and inclusion and accessibility. I'm really delighted, actually, that you've chosen this theme today. The government is committed to ensuring that transport works for everybody, and improving accessibility and inclusion is something that underpins a lot of my work in the Department for Transport. So I'm really pleased to have the opportunity to participate in this discussion today and to hear your questions and to hear people's views. This event is a recognition of the vital role of transport planners in designing and shaping an accessible transport system that allows everyone the same opportunity to travel confidently, easily and without extra cost. For disabled people in particular, this is vitally important and is key to unlocking this government's ambition to halve the disability employment gap, which currently stands at an unacceptable 30%. As well as saying a few words on improving accessibility, I'd also like to touch on inclusion more generally, not least because of the department's race champion. This is a cause very close to my heart. And I certainly don't have all the answers, but I'd like to highlight some of the actions we've taken in DfT and very much look forward to the discussion. I'll start with a few facts and figures. Over 13.3 million people in the UK live with an impairment, a disability, or a limiting chronic illness. Approximately 44% of the elderly, 8% of children, and 18% of working age adults are classified as disabled. In general, Disabled people travel less than non-disabled people, and when they do travel, are much more reliant on cars, buses, and taxis. Our research also shows that just 69% of disabled people were confident travelling compared to 90% of non-disabled people. These figures predate the pandemic, which has resulted in confidence ratings for disabled travellers falling even further. For many disabled people, travelling is often accompanied by fear, anxiety, and stress. The communications campaign, It's Everyone's Journey, aims to support our ambition of equal access on public transport by creating a more supportive and considerate environment. Following the drop in passenger numbers caused by the pandemic, patronage on trains outside of London has now reached about 60%, and on buses it is up to 70%. However, as passengers return to public transport, there's an opportunity to reset travel habits and to create new social norms. We know, for example, that people are being more considerate of those around them for all sorts of reasons, and we want to sustain this and encourage it, encouraging positive behaviours before old habits return. So for me, improving accessibility is not just about physical infrastructure, it's about every aspect of the transport system, from who's in the room when decisions are made to how individuals experience their end-to-end journey. And for too many people still today, our transport system is a system that does not work for them. So how do we tackle this? Whether it's the school run, travelling to work, or simply getting out and about to visit family and friends, an inclusive and accessible transport system is vital to participation in everyday life. If the transport network is to be truly accessible, we must consider a broad range of needs. Accessibility goes well beyond providing wheelchair access, although that's a good start. So my first message is simple. We must talk and listen to our customers and our users, and to those who want to use our services but can't. In DFT, we've established an inclusive transport stakeholder group, bringing together disabled people's organisations. The group facilitates discussions on evidence, knowledge and expertise to help inform our policies to deliver the government's inclusive transport strategy and the National Disability Strategy. The group challenges us on questions such as what provisions should we make for passengers with neurodiverse conditions, or do disabled women experience the transport network differently from disabled men? We also benefit from the expertise of the Disabled Persons Transport Advisory Committee, or DIPTAC. And I will say DIPTAC because it's otherwise a bit of a mouthful. DIPTAC is an expert committee which advises and challenges us on a whole host of issues. For example, as part of preparing our response to COVID-19 and our passenger and operator guidance, we sought DIPTAC's advice to ensure that disabled people could still access the transport network during the height of the pandemic. Your organisations may not have the benefit of statutory advisors on disability like DIPTAC, but focus groups and engagement cost very little, and we all need to be speaking to a broad spectrum of stakeholders when we develop our plans, policies and schemes. In preparing and designing consultations, we need to consider who's affected by the proposals and reach out for both technical advice from experts and views from the public. When engaging with the public, it's important to also identify any underrepresented groups and how we'll reach them. Diversity of thought and experience in decision making can also help ensure the transport network is accessible and inclusive by minimising the risk of unconscious bias. For example, in DFT, we are committed to increasing the diversity of our senior staff in particular, and have seen an increase in women and ethnic minority representation in recent years. And this year we were included for the first time in the Times Top 50 Employers for Women list. But we are still not where we should be on ethnic minority, nor on disabled or LGBTQ plus representation. And this is something that I, my fellow DGs and Permanent Secretary continue to spend significant time on as a leadership team, supported by our excellent staff networks. As part of those efforts, I'm the race champion for DFT. Our Inclusion Action Plan aims to improve our existing systems for DFT to be confidently diverse, to be inclusive for everyone, and to maximise the potential for all staff. And our specific race action plan also incorporates further actions to ensure ethnic minority colleagues feel a sense of belonging, freedom to be themselves and achieve their potential. Within our local transport directorate, we're piloting initiatives to become disability confident. Open conversations between staff, their line managers and colleagues are key to creating a workplace where disabled and non-disabled people can give of their best, and we're taking steps to support this. All these things aim to create a more inclusive working environment that will attract and retain the diverse range of talent we need to ensure that we reflect the diversity of taxpayers and the travelling public we serve, and that a more diverse set of perspectives are brought to bear on DfT's policymaking. I am sure that many of you are taking similar steps in your own organisations, and I welcome any examples of what's working well for you. Transport professionals also need to be trained and confident to undertake due consideration of equalities and inclusion issues. In DfT, we run an internal training programme for all staff covering the public sector equality duty and equality impact assessments. And we're building a community of equality leaders across the department who can disseminate information and promote best practice. Contrary to what we often see, an equality impact assessment is not just about mitigating any negative impacts on disabled people or any other protected characteristics. It's about thinking creatively about how you can maximise the benefits of your policy or project for all, regardless of age, race, sex, or any other characteristic. We also offer a disability equality and awareness training package for transport operators, created with input from transport professionals, disabled people, and DIPTAC. This is available free of charge on gov.uk, and after a pause during COVID, we intend to promote it much more actively next year. Turning to our other policy measures, historically DfT has very much been an infrastructure department, so it's perhaps not surprising that some of the most familiar access measures involve building things like step-free access. For example, on rail, our successful Access for All programme has provided step-free accessible routes at 220 stations, and over 100 more will be delivered by 2024. Around 1,500 stations have also benefited from a variety of smaller scale access improvements. This is in addition to station accessibility improvements delivered as part of major projects such as Crossrail, and further rail accessibility is a key part of our rail reform white paper. Those measures are, of course, extremely important, but measures to improve accessibility and inclusion do not always need to cost a great deal. And when it comes to encouraging behavioural change, may cost very little at all. For example, incorporating equality and diversity into existing training programmes and embedding accessible design into planning processes. Critically, it will almost always be more cost effective to build accessibility in from the start. For example, ordering a bus with capability for audio and visual announcements rather than retrofitting. As a department, we have committed to building accessibility into new mobility solutions from the start. We must ensure that new mobility takes account of the needs of disabled people and other groups. E-scooters, autonomous vehicles and pods have the potential to create both barriers and opportunities for disabled people. We will shortly be publishing a long overdue update to our guidance on tactile paving surfaces, not headline grabbing, but a great example of how small measures and small steps can make all the difference in a disabled person's confidence to travel and remain independent. Similarly, we're funding the provision of changing places toilets in motorway service areas and targeted rail stations, and will next year be laying regulations to mandate the provision of audible and visible information on buses. These regulations follow our investment of 3.5 million to help smaller operators level up their services by providing this information. And for disabled people living on the Isles of Scilly and the Isle of Wight, a 1 million Maritime Accessibility Fund will boost their access to work, leisure and services on the mainland by improving lifeline ports and ferries. Simple measures that can nevertheless make a huge difference. Another challenge we as a sector must rise to is how to ensure that we continue to respond to needs that evolve over time. For example, our recent research suggests that more than 50% of wheelchairs currently in use are larger than the current reference wheelchair, which underpins the legal definition of a wheelchair accessible vehicle. And like many other organisations, we will need to consider the impact of long COVID on the needs of transport users, even as our understanding of long COVID is only just emerging. Before I finish, I'd like to just highlight two more areas of the department's work to build a more inclusive transport system. Firstly, everyone should be able to travel confidently and to feel safe while doing so. However, as we all know, there have been tragic instances this year which highlighted that is sadly not the case for many people in our community. The department does work closely with transport partners on a range of initiatives to address the problems faced by vulnerable groups, including women, on the transport network. However, the senior leadership in DfT and our ministers are keen to do more to improve safety for women and girls in particular on our transport network. And that's why ministers appointed Laura Schoaf and Anne Shaw in the West Midlands as DfT's first violence against women and girls champions. Our champions are engaging with campaign groups, industry and government to understand areas for improvement across the UK's transport network. And by January 2022, they will produce independent recommendations for the department and wider transport network on what best practice should be adopted to improve safety of the transport network for women and girls. And second, we've secured funding from HMT's Shared Outcomes Fund for a project on tackling loneliness. This aims to build the evidence base for how transport can contribute to alleviating loneliness by funding local authorities and other partners to run pilot schemes and evaluating their impact. We will share this evidence to enable the department and others in the sector to consider how to loneliness-proof future transport schemes. This project also demonstrates how we can and must think creatively about how transport can contribute to alleviating some of the challenges facing our society. Transport is, after all, not just laying tarmac or tracks. It is about connecting people, all of the people, with places. As I conclude, I'd like to leave you with one key message. If your policy or project affects people in any way, then you need to be thinking accessibility and you need to be thinking diversity and inclusion more broadly. Too often, transport has been designed around an average person or passenger that simply doesn't exist. Data and evidence are key. We must understand who is and therefore isn't using the service currently, and only then can we begin to identify the opportunities to remove barriers and improve the equality of access. As I said at the start, I by no means have all of the answers to the challenges I've set out and the challenges we face, but I hope hearing about approaches we're taking in DfT has been helpful, and very much look forward to hearing what more great ideas are out there. I'm very happy to take any questions. Mark, back to you.
Lovely, thank you very much, Emma, and particularly thank you because I know you're not feeling particularly well today, so that you wouldn't have told that from that speech. It was brilliant. Okay, so we've had a couple of questions in. I'll cluster a couple of these together, perhaps around a theme of sort of new technology, disruptive technology, and how we can take into account the needs of those people with protected characteristics when we're pushing forward with innovation, if you like. So there's this question here about electric vehicle charging points, and another question around e-scooters. And I'd be very surprised the department have done a lot of thinking on this, particularly around e-scooters and its impact on those with protected characteristics. But are there any sort of headline findings that you're able to share with us here today about how we can minimise the negative impacts and actually maximise the positive impacts? And as you said, Emma, it's not just about mitigation; it's also about reducing the tensions between those different groups as well.
Yeah, I mean, I'll ask Jessica to come in as well. But I mean, this is, as I said in my opening remarks, this is why we have the user groups that we do, and DIPTAC in particular has looked at this as an issue, and I've had conversations with them about both the opportunity and the risks, quite frankly, around some of those emerging technologies, the rollout of the e-scooter trials, and you're right, sort of EV charge points and accessibility issues there. And I think, one of the other things that I said was making sure that we design in these things from the start is critically important. And that's back to, good policy making. It's back to the data and evidence. It's back to testing as we go. And I hope that the department is learning to do that. But it is a constant sort of rhythm and struggle to make sure that these are things that are that are thought about at the right time. But DIPTAC really does do a huge amount within the department to challenge, to bring to bear evidence to ensure that is thought about. But Jessica, you might want to add a few words.
Yes, I think on EV charging, there's a whole clutch of issues there. There's issues around how easy is it actually to connect the charger with the vehicle. Are there cables trailing across the footway? Is there enough space left on the footway for people to get past? Is it ugly and inconvenient? Is it the right height? So I know my colleagues are thinking hard about some of those issues and what it means to ensure that everyone can get past, and we design it right at the beginning, and we have rapid deployment of EV charging, because we know that is one of the things that people fear is holding up the switch from petrol and diesel vehicles over to electric. So So I agree there is more work to do there. On e-scooters, clearly that's the point of the current trials, is to get some more evidence. And I was intrigued by the comment that's appeared in the chat, which suggests that we should just ban them. And I think actually at the moment they are illegal unless they're being used in a trial. So they are already banned, but I noticed that quite a lot of people are using them. So just banning them isn't a straightforward answer, because they're banned already and yet quite prevalent. So life as ever is not as simple as just changing the law and then everybody automatically complies with it. Life's more complicated than that.
It is, yeah. I mean, we as CPS, one of the TP Day leading events was about best practice inequalities impact assessment, and it's I think Brogan at PTRC helps support these events. Says it's now the most viewed on YouTube by transport planners, because it's actually an area where well, as one contributor to that event said, we've just kind of been left to get on with it, really, and not necessarily with the training and expertise necessary to deliver some of that stuff. And for some practitioners, where you're really trying to do some very difficult balancing between different protected characteristics, that can be very challenging. And you mentioned that this is something that you do a lot of training with DFT staff, and I wonder if it may be that looking across the industry, bringing in some best practice guidance for transport planners that's maybe mandatory within codes of conduct might be something worth exploring.
Yeah, and it was something that as you spoke, Mark, I was thinking that this might be an area where there is more to be done in terms of bringing kind of visibility to best practice and ensuring that we are sharing best practice across the sector. Because as you say, otherwise there's a danger that everybody is kind of looking at their own microcosm and the trade-offs that have to happen at a very local level. And there is undoubtedly, I'm sure, much that we could learn from each other on how to adequately train and professionalise our staff in thinking about the trade-offs here.
Yeah. So it's a fair number of questions here that are coming in. One question that has been posed by Lucy Marstron Torresig, who's a TPS board member, is about how we feed effectively the views of children into some of these decision makings, as given they're obviously one of the protected characteristics. Are there any active initiatives from the DFT that we should be aware of in this space?
Do you know, that has actually stumped me. I don't think I've ever been asked that question before. I certainly have conversations with local authority leaders who talk quite a lot actually about engaging with the youth. So whether that is actually children or sort of teenagers, I think they're normally talking to. So having youth councils and that kind of thing to feed into policy making at a very local level. So I'm very conscious that quite a lot of the conversations I have around local transport planning and local transport initiatives have those voices as part of it. I'm not aware of anything at a national level, but Jessica may be able to correct me.
I agree that we don't often explicitly ask for the views of children or young people, but there are some DFT initiatives that are aimed at young people. So cycle training, bikeability is not solely but primarily directed at young people. Quite a lot of road safety initiatives are directed primarily at young people, particularly at young men. So there are aspects of policy which are definitely aimed at a younger audience. And of course, the needs of young people on the transport system are quite different. Often they're making shorter journeys, they're going to school, which can be quite a long journey, but usually isn't. And aspects of personal safety and crime are quite different when you're a young person travelling to and from school, I think, than at older age groups. So often I think we'd expect that transport operators or local authorities to be picking those up as part of the consideration of transport in their areas. Certainly when the local transport plan guidance comes out, we'll be asking about the interests of users across the piece in the local area. I agree with Emma, we haven't asked explicitly very often about young people and children.
They do write in. So I do get quite a lot of letters from children counting traffic levels and writing to me about environmental concerns quite often. So they do get in touch, they do make their voices heard.
I mean, someone who started their career as a school travel planner actually a few years ago now, that joint DFT, DFE, as it was then, initiative. I thought that was a really interesting window actually, because it did make you had to be good at that job. You had to force yourself to see the journey through the eyes of a child, and actually that was very, it was actually often about dog poo. That to be a particularly big issue, as much as it was about some really fundamental planning issues. So it was good. It really sort of quite grounding, I felt. So it might be something that would be good to explore and encourage people to revisit maybe some of that stuff through the LTP guidance. There's a specific question here. I'm sure you would have anticipated this about pavement parking. Do you feel to be in a position to be able to give any update at this session on the discussions that are going on about that?
So I can't give an explicit update, but what I can say is that this is under active consideration by ministers, and we hope to be able to make an announcement very soon.
Excellent. It's obviously something that's been given a lot of consideration over the last 12, 18 months. Trying to balance out the urban-rural, there's a specific question here about disabled people who live in rural areas. Now, you obviously published a rural mobility strategy or challenge paper. Do you feel that this is an area that gets enough focus, or is it something that does tend to come down on the urban area?
So, I mean, I might let Jessica say a few words as well here, but I think, we have got we've got a lot of work going on with local authorities around bus service improvements. I think in rural areas, it is the reliance on bus services that is so critical. And therefore, the issues of accessibility, of frequency of service, reliability are absolutely crucial. I do hope, and there is an ambition through the bus service improvement plans and the work we're doing with local authorities to try and tackle some of those issues. But this has been this way for a long time. Will take some time. I suspect will take quite a bit of investment on the part of both national government and local authorities. But I think what we do have is a real recognition that bus services, rural bus services, are an important lifeline, and that those sorts of issues are the things that will really determine whether they make a difference in people's lives and enable people to connect to the services and the economic activity that they want. But Jessica, I don't know if there's anything that you want to add.
I agree with Emma that bus service improvement plans are really important for rural areas. And in the National Bus Strategy, there was discussion of the Rural Mobility Fund and trying out some demand responsive transport systems, which might, in some rural areas, be part of the solution rather than just scheduled services. I also think taxis are really relevant in rural areas, if there are fewer taxi services, or in this context, if there are fewer that are able to take a wheelchair or otherwise able to take some people with some disabilities, then that's going to be a particular problem. So that's another aspect, in addition to buses, I think, in rural areas that we all need to keep an eye on.
Yeah, and I was interested in your point about the project you're looking at loneliness, Emma, because obviously that comes into it very much so, doesn't it? The fact that sometimes for some people these interactions with transport operators is actually the only interaction they might have in any given day.
Yeah, I mean, we know transport is not just about about supporting and enabling economic activity. It's those connections across society, whether that's from a well-being, loneliness perspective, or just connecting people to the services that they need to access. So it's really important to remember that and to not look at it as a one-dimensional sort of enabler in an economic growth context.
Yeah, and as a friend of mine often points out, that it's one of the few very, it's a melting pot of society, the public transport, and actually is a practical example of how you do reduce tensions between those groups of different protected characteristics if it's done right. Actually, and just following on from that, there's a question here from Jonathan Flowers, a co-opted member of the TPS board representing academic institutions, talking about the challenges of using rail services, particularly when there are rowdy football fans on the services, and how we can tackle some of those sorts of barriers. And it very much follows a session that we had in partnership with the APPG on hate crime, talking about what the different problems were and what the causes were of hate crime. And one of the interesting insights from that session was that very few people actually go onto the public transport network in order to racially abuse somebody. There's normally some sort of trigger. And there's some sort of community acceptance that people won't necessarily react or try to stop somebody from doing that. So if we can remove the trigger and we can increase the amount of community engagement seeking to report and challenge that sort of behaviour, we can eradicate much of the issue. Even though as transport planners we can't maybe deal with some of those wider societal issues. And it all came down, interestingly, and as a transport planning quite attractively, to data, and understanding what are the different sparks that lead to these incidents that then can go on to create wider societal problems. And obviously hate crime is a particular pernicious one because it targets an individual but actually affects a very wide community. You mentioned about the project there around women, but are there some wider considerations that we could bring into space, particularly maybe about understanding a bit better the data?
So I think the key thing that actually I've learned through the COVID pandemic actually is bringing to bear quite a lot more behavioural insight into how we think about transport. So it's sort of what I was saying in my opening remarks. It's traditionally been seen as it's an infrastructure problem. It's a physical problem. Accessibility and inclusion, and actually it is that, but it's not just that. It's about behaviours and it's about wider concerns. So I think bringing behavioural insight to bear on how we think about problems is really important. We have a new chief scientific advisor at the department who is absolutely hot on this topic, and I've had many an interesting conversation with her already about how we can bring more of that into the work that we do. And I think it has a particular resonance actually when it comes to accessibility and inclusion. So for me that has been a real revelation, and we used it through the pandemic, and I'm really keen that we continue to build on that.
Excellent. I'm conscious that we've kept you for a while now, but one more question if I can. So there was a point here about inclusive mobility and the fact that there are some authorities that don't necessarily give due weight to the requirements in inclusive mobility, which may of course be for a number of different reasons. But I understand of course that is going for a refresh at the moment. Is there anything you can say about that, and also just how we can encourage people to give the correct weight to the guidance that sits within that?
So, I mean, I think this is a conversation that we will have with local councils as we look at bus service improvement plans. We have a number of both formal and informal routes to having those conversations about whether local councils are following the guidance that is set out nationally, and what some of the reasons are why they might not be. And there may well be very good reasons for that. There may be issues that we're unaware of, but I think we will certainly be using all of the levers at our disposal, whether funding, whether regulatory, whether through conversations with councils about the outcomes that we expect as we disperse funding post SR, to ensure that actually we are all delivering on the outcomes that we've signed up to and that we've set out. But I think you have to inevitably use all of those levers in order to try and do that.
Yeah, excellent. Jessica, do you want to comment on that, or are you happy with?
I don't think I've got anything to add to Emma's answer.
Okay, excellent. Final question was there was one here from about leveling up and about how we might see leveling up respond to some of these issues, particularly around accessibility, perhaps. And then maybe a bit of a rider from myself there about the changes in the appraisal process, and particularly something opening up some of these the strategic outline business case to incorporate issues such as well-being. Does that give us a bit more, scheme promoters, a bit more space to maybe increase the prioritisation of some of these schemes? I mean, we obviously see big sums of money going into accessibility at stations, but compared to some of the other sort of congestion or peak provision type schemes, they're quite small. Is this an opportunity to see that rebalance, perhaps?
I think it probably is, Mark. Yes, I mean, I think what we've seen through the levelling up agenda so far, and obviously we've got a white paper still to come, and through the first round of levelling up fund bids, is an opportunity to disperse money to a wider set of projects, to look at the criteria a bit more widely, and I think that does give the opportunity at a very local level to think about what is right in that place, and what can help. And I think you're right. It's as I said before, it's not just looking through an economic lens, but looking through a well-being, a connectivity, a loneliness lens, whatever it might be. And transport can be, it's not usually the whole of the answer, but can be an important part of the answer in that. And bringing that to bear in the levelling up agenda is absolutely, I think, part and parcel of what this government is trying to achieve through that.
I can't really see why that isn't already part of the strategic case. If it's an important part of a project or programme, well-being could, as you suggest, Mark, be an important part of the argument as to why this is a good thing. I recognise it might be a bit hard to then turn that into pounds and pence, but business cases aren't just looked at through a pounds and pence lens. They are also looking at, why is this a good thing? Why is it going to make the world a better place? That's what goes in the first part of a business case.
Yeah, that's good. And of course, I guess as we move forward on with that agenda, we'll be able to get better understandings of the sort of metrics that we can bring into that to translate some of that stuff to pounds and pence. Excellent. Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate your time taking a field of a vast and diverse array of questions there, and joining us indeed for your speech as well, Emma. So thank you very much. I think you guys have got to go off to another meeting now, but you're welcome to stay if you do have a few more moments. And we'll move on to our next speaker.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we're bringing in the team from Jacobs now. If you want to turn on your brightly coloured, showing me up with official Transport Planning Day backgrounds. We have Richard Sanderson, Sharon Francis, and Katie Peirce, and they're going to be talking about gender and transport planning. Guys, over to you.
Thanks very much, Mark. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Richard Sanderson, and I'm the head of transport planning at Jacobs in the UK and Europe. And we're absolutely thrilled to be sponsoring Transport Planning Day again. And throughout the day, a number of us across the business have been celebrating everything that we do as a profession. This year's theme of EDI is absolutely key to how we as the transport planning profession go forward, creating transport systems which recognise the diversity of our transport users, their needs and their preferences. At Jacobs, we're always looking at ways to challenge today and reinvent tomorrow, and we're passionate about encouraging our employees to bring our whole selves to work. We continue to value the diversity of our teams and the extra value that brings to our projects. On this theme, we recently reached out to our Jacobs employee networks, which you'll see on the screen, to get their input into our submission to the Reece Jeffries Road Fund's vision of roads for the next 50 years. And it was fascinating to see the broad range of feedback we got from different groups showing the challenges that we are facing in creating inclusive transport systems. Whether it be the safety concerns highlighted by our Women's Network or the challenges of neurodiversity from our ACE, Access, Connect and Empower Network, which supports our colleagues with disabilities. So our presentation today looks in more detail at the aspect of gender and transport. For the past couple of years, Sharon Francis and Katie Peirce from our London office have led some research looking at a lot of detail of specific challenges in this area. As a profession, we've looked a lot at inclusive and fair design, maybe less so on inclusive modelling and appraisal. In part, this is due to a lack of data on the subject, but as we get access to vast amounts of data going forward, we have a fantastic opportunity as a profession to live inclusive appraisal and truly drive fair and inclusive decisions. In fact, it's noteworthy that the recent Modelling World Conference, a poll showed that the greatest opportunity to drive innovation in transport modelling came from greater diversity in the transport modelling profession itself. And so, with no further ado, let me hand over to Sharon and Katie. Thanks very much, Mark.
Thank you, Richard. Hi, everyone. So we're going to be talking to you about our project, which we've been working on for the past 2.5, 3 years. And we've had a thought about understanding how the gender aspect is quite important in transport and how we can start thinking about recommendations, especially the bits that Emma was talking about just a little before, can be included within our day-to-day work as transport planners going forward. So we're starting off with this graph here, which is something that we've prepared, which just is an exaggeration of showing how people's travel habits change throughout their lifetimes. But these exaggerated differences also have been evolving, and it would be interesting to see how they look maybe 20 to 30 years in the future due to the accelerated impacts of COVID or working from home, or the way that people have different responsibilities, especially at home and work now. And more often we can see that the transport network caters to, let's say, more often men's needs a lot easier than perhaps gender specific women or perhaps people with different intersectionality requirements. So we'll be taking you through these 4 stages in a quick stop, and we'll go to our next recommendations around what we think are to be implemented or to be looked at in the future going forward.
Thanks, Sharon. So as Sharon said, this is an indicative diagram, but it is based on data. So we use some London Travel Demand Survey data to kind of come up with these conclusions. We identified 4 groups when we were looking at variations of gender in travel across different age groups. And the first one, I think, actually is one of the most interesting. And that's that the gender gap in travel, and particularly around things like the gender cycling gap, can be seen at a really young age. So actually, you can see gender cycling gaps start to emerge in children as young as 8. And, for me, I think this is a real opportunity because, knowing that, gender cycling gaps can start at a young age, continue to grow and then sort of baked in as we move towards adulthood. We can start to target our interventions and also things like our cycle training when we are giving it to kind of smaller, younger groups so that it can start to address some of those challenges and close those gaps early on.
And secondly, moving towards the young adult stage, again, this is something that Emma picked up before, but what we found is there's a huge difference in the age groups of, say, 26 to 35 between young women and young men in changing their route after dark. So it shows how people perceive safety or the fear of crime makes a big impact on the way they travel. So more often there is an added implication of that, which is they have to change mode, which means they have to have a time penalty as well as a fare penalty, because you'd rather take a taxi from A to B if it's a dark path along a canal that you have to walk after hours. So we found that a big impact of this is on the crime reporting as well. So a lot of the crimes that have been reported are mostly on young men, but a lot more young women feel the fear of reporting these crimes, which might be different to what perhaps they think happens before. So when we started looking at CCTV as well, it was seen that a lot more younger women prefer to have security personnel in prisons as a person rather than having just CCTV cameras. So putting all of this into perspective, it'd be interesting to see, how would the nighttime economy look like in the future if you had a lot more younger women, younger girls out and being able to work, able to go to events, go to jobs, and how the economy is going to be looking like in the future.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Moving on to the third group, the caregiving ages. The first thing that I think surprised me and Sharon the most when we started looking at this group was actually the average age of a caregiver. So I think both of us were expecting that it would, caregiving travel would start to emerge and probably peak actually, maybe, when people have their first child, perhaps in their early 30s, when they have kind of children, they're doing that kind of stuff. But actually, the average age of a person undertaking a caregiving trip was actually in the late 40s, early 50s age bracket. And that's kind of representative of the kind of aging population that we're starting to see, where people are taking care of not only younger children, but also of elderly parents. So at this age, we see quite a few changes in types of trips that people make. First of all, we see a huge increase in trip chaining. So that's where people undertake lots of trips, kind of chained together, where maybe you're leaving home, dropping your kids at school, going to the pharmacy to pick up some medicine, maybe visiting an elderly parent, and then maybe going and doing some shopping on the way home. And this isn't captured very well in some of the modelling techniques that we currently use to appraise schemes. The second kind of thing that we start to see is that people tend to move from making these, I guess, quite radial in and out of the city centre trips, maybe, twice a day, once in and once out, and start doing these kind of shorter circular trips in their local area. And these local circular trips actually aren't always so well accommodated by the transport network, and possibly see less investment in terms of the kind of total allocation of funding that's given to them. So what this means is that when people reach this caregiving age, sometimes they face possibly, again, a journey time penalty or a little bit more difficulty, perhaps a higher cost in undertaking some of these new habits that they start to form at this age group.
And finally, looking at the older age group, we've seen that as trends change, a lot more older women do end up driving these days, but still more than often we've seen statistics that over 2 million people over 75, over the age of 75, live alone, and 3/4 of these are women. So how do all the women, say, get about to go to the pharmacy, go have, trips to the doctors, to the groups, to do groceries, etc. Because more than often, local transport, rural transport are the lifelines for these people to go about. So there's discussion before we had around loneliness pandemic. It'd be interesting to see the social care side of things as well, when we start understanding how do older people, as well as these intersectionalities with, say, disabled people, have impact on the way they access travel, perhaps the impact on why they cannot access travel because of these restrictions in the way transport has been currently set up.
Absolutely. So something that we're really passionate about is that we really need to go from this understanding, which, we see relatively well, actually, sometimes, especially kind of on the research side of things, and moving from understanding to action. So we've come up with 4 key recommendations, which we want to share with you today, based loosely around the business case process. But really, the message that we want to get across is that we should be considering, demographic disaggregated data at every stage of the work we do, and really kind of weaving inclusion into all of our projects.
So picking up the first section around problem identification and options development. So as Katie mentioned, we know that the current transport sector employment diversity statistics show that we are looking for a lot more diverse workforce going in the future. So what can we do at this stage in time to make sure that the projects that we are planning, building, even designing for the future are inclusive in nature? And that's where data comes in play. So we recommend that we need disaggregated travel data as well as perception data to be considered and included when we start doing business cases, when we start planning for schemes, way ahead in the process. So even when we're starting to look at problem identification stage, because these are critical to understand how does the scheme options would look like down in the process.
And I think it also feeds into that kind of conversation around whether we're looking at a radial scheme or a circular scheme as well. So really at that strategic level. The second recommendation that we make is around benefits calculation. Particularly, I know if anyone has heard me speak on this topic before, I talk a lot about how caregiving is worth billions to the economy, but it's actually not captured very well in the values of time. It's given a very similar value of time to, going to the cinema, for example. So, is there a better way that we, particularly as transport modelers, but as any kind of transport practitioner, capture the value of, some of these other types of trips that are being made and incorporate it into things like BCRs and the economic side of our options appraisal process?
And next, looking at the design side. So we know that there's a whole section different completely on inclusive design, but it's quite important to highlight for the fact that, how accessible are our current networks and our current transport systems. So for instance, if we could help 51,000 people with work limiting disabilities into employment, it's not just going to help them get into employment, but you're going to look at wider economic benefits, such as you're offering benefits of around 450 million per year in pounds to the exchequer, because you're getting a lot more people into employment, you're providing access to services, to pharmacies, to anything that people currently feel that they are not being able to access transport network.
Mm-hmm. I think in terms of detailed design as well, there are kind of some elements where we want to particularly focus on gender here. So women are more likely to travel encumbered, either with kind of shopping, small children, maybe traveling with an elderly parent. So things like step-free access, which I know we speak about a lot in relation to kind of disabilities and, access for all different kinds of groups. That is also very relevant to women and particularly the trips that they make. The other kind of element to this is obviously around the safety thing. So as Sharon said, men are more likely to be victims of crime on the transport network, but women are more likely to kind of say that they feel afraid traveling, and this does change how they travel. So if we can make, the transport system feel safe, then that is a big win as well, to kind of encourage women to be able to travel how they want. And then the final element of our recommendations, and something that actually I think is probably key to kind of creating more inclusive outcomes, is making sure that once a scheme is in place, we are understanding who is using the scheme and who is benefiting from it. And then not just understanding that, but sharing it as widely as possible. I think as an industry, we're great at sharing best practice, but I think there's loads more that we can do to make sure that we really are understanding who these schemes are working for, how we can make them better, and then actually implementing those changes for the future.
I think it also gives us a good understanding of who is not using the scheme and why, perhaps, as well, because we think that is quite important to make sure that a lot more people feel comfortable and feel that they can easily access these schemes going forward. So next we'll be looking at a few of the examples of how we've started to incorporate these recommendations into our day-to-day practice. So we've started making sure that we've looked at demographic disaggregated analysis, especially in transport surveys, so that, as Katie mentioned, it's important for us to start collecting the data and understanding it, because more often we just don't know why people perhaps don't even travel, or maybe don't make that trip because of X and Y reasons. And then looking at design and understanding how design can have an impact on the way different people travel. So for instance, we have a colleague who's been looking at impact of crossings on men and women, and we found that, for instance, women do prefer a lot more audible crossings compared to men. So it's understanding these differences in the way people react and have to feel more at ease to be using that infrastructure is quite important as well. So I think looking at some of these case studies, we found that it's quite important to do a lot of trial projects so that we can understand how does this look like in the world out there now when we start doing these projects, be it a bus project, walking, cycling, a road project, whatever. Once we start doing these trials, just as we've done in other projects such as electric vehicle charging, the charging system that we have, or even wider, the ever more important, the COP26, the environmental strategy is always, we have to take that step forward by making a few trial projects to see this is how people respond to it. This is how we can start fine-tuning these projects to make sure that a lot more people can access transport going forward.
Mm-hmm. So hopefully this has kind of given everyone at least something that they feel that they can take away as kind of their day job and start to implement some of these things into their projects. If you've got any questions, happy to take them, or please do reach out to us. Emails are below.
Excellent. Thank you, whole of the Jacobs team. Okay, so if you've got any questions for Jacobs, please do pop them into the chat. I was just noted that I popped there the latest data that we have from our membership survey. So I'm not saying that every transport planner is a member of the Transport Planning Society, although of course I would encourage every transport planner to be a member. But at the current time, 32% are female, and that's up slightly on last year. So I think we clearly do a little bit better than the transport industry as a whole based on that Women in Transport survey, but we're still a long way, I think, away from being truly representative. I wonder, are there specific things that we should be doing as an industry to encourage more female recruits into it? Are there particular barriers that you guys have noted and seen?
I can answer that. Yeah, sure. So both me and Sharon are part of the Women's Network. We're kind of heavily involved in trying to get more women into the industry, trying to retain them, which I think is also kind of half of the challenge. Lots of people kind of leave the industry, especially when they decide to have children. It's very difficult to get back in, sometimes especially with things like changing technologies. An example I think is really interesting is, for example, we've transitioned to Teams very quickly. I can imagine if you were taking 2 or 3 years off from the industry, that it might be very difficult to come back in and learn those tools and pick them up again when everyone else is already up to speed with them. So thinking about things like that, I think, is really important. I'm sure we both have examples of challenges we've faced around, comments and stuff at work, but I think that actually giving people opportunities to express their diversity in their job is probably the thing that makes me want to stay in my job and, feeling like I can bring my whole self to work and, just really make a change to the industry, I guess. Sharon, did you have anything you wanted to add?
No, I think what we found quite interesting, just one point, is around the job description and the adverts, because more than often it turns away a lot of people, because there was a bit of a discussion around how should a transport planner look like, who is the ideal transport planner. To be honest, in fact, it could be anyone. It could be someone not just with a geography or an engineering degree. It could be someone with behavioral science degree, just like Emma was saying, because that is becoming more and more predominant. It could be the diversity of backgrounds you can come from is a lot, and I think we need to recognize that as a profession so that we can open it wide to people beyond engineers and geographers.
I think it's that's a really interesting point, Sharon, because actually being part of an American company, our American transport planning colleagues, a lot of them have much broader backgrounds than we have. Lots of people with liberal arts degrees in literature and things like that, which actually brings completely different mindsets than what we have traditionally, as you say, building up with maths, engineering, geography, etc. So actually, we're proactively looking this year, and Katie's been helping me this, to broaden out and bring in a wider group of people in at the graduate level as we try to balance things up. And the other piece as well, and I'm a transport planner, my wife's a transport planner, my brother-in-law's a transport planner. We've quite a lot of transport planners knocking about. That coming back after we had children, really important. And actually, that's the thing that we're practically trying to do now. We're creating more flexible environments, because we found, as Katie was saying, a real tail off of people when they get in that stage of their lifetime.
That's really interesting. Very interesting to hear that perspective. Comparing the UK scene with the American scene. I mean, certainly, Transport Planning Society, we make a big deal out of the fact that it's a real strength of the industry that we do bring in people from all these different backgrounds in a way that sometimes maybe you don't necessarily see, certainly in engineering, but even in planning, sometimes you do get a range of different people. And coming back to your point, Richard, I mean, the probably best transport planner I've ever worked with, I had a degree in Irish studies, so I'm not quite sure how that it certainly did. I think it's really important to be able to welcome diverse people, and in fact, actually, TPS has just reviewed its professional development scheme to make sure that we're ironing out some of those issues where we kind of stopped people who were quite clearly transport planners. They were working to influence demand on the network, or they were working to influence supply structure of the network itself, but weren't able to meet that scheme because there was a particular focus on very in-depth data analysis or modelling or whatever. I think it's important that transport planners are aware of these things and can understand how they can be used, but it's not necessary for transport planners to be at Modelling World every year. So I think there's a real need to make sure that we are welcoming, and I think that's really important, perhaps particularly important with a gender perspective as well. Okay, so going back to the chat, there was a question here specifically about understanding maybe some of the sort of minutiae of how different groups use the road network, and a point here about people crossing the road. Do we need to understand better different gender perspectives, or indeed perspectives across all protected characteristics on that rather simple action? And I'm certainly aware of lots of work that's been done over the years, but it does feel a bit old, some of this stuff.
I can start off with that. So Mark, Jacobs have done a lot of work on this. We've done not just research projects, but also actual projects in Scotland looking at this. And currently we have one looking at disabilities, not just gender. So looking at the gender data to begin with, because the disability work is still happening now, is the fact that we found there is a clear difference in how certain genders perceive safety at crossings and the type of crossings as well. Because it was not just, for instance, I gave the example of the audible crossings, but also about making sure that when a car approaches the crossing, how do a man and woman feel, especially in terms of speed, the propensity to make a crossing, even though there is maybe no car coming. So there is a very big difference in the way men and women approach crossings, especially the types of crossings, be it a token crossing, etc. So there is a work currently being done now on the disability side. So I'm sure once that's done, there'll be some interesting results from that as well.
That's really interesting. Okay, I've got a question from Jonathan Flower. Actually, this question is from Jonathan Flower. I did misattribute a question to him earlier, so I'm pleased to be able to sort of rectify that. It's a question actually to you, Richard. Looking at the university perspective, do you think there's anything that they could be doing to be reaching out to a wider range of graduates? We did talk in the last session actually about the importance of apprenticeship and apprenticeship degrees potentially in bridging some of these barriers that some people find to getting into the sector.
That's a really good question. I guess there's probably a natural, saying before, there's probably a natural path that people take as they go through their degrees as to what sort of pathways it takes you into transport planning. So you'll probably be in certain departments, you might have notice boards, or I guess things have moved on since I was at university, but other sorts of information gathering that would be focusing on different types of undergraduate degrees. And I guess probably helping us and other organisations in transport planning to widen out that to a wider range of different degrees. I mean, I think we talk about a lot in a minute storytelling. We need more storytellers, and we need more. And even I think you mentioned before, the change in Green Book towards probably greater emphasis on strategic case and those sort of things means that we need those people who can tell those stories probably more than we've ever done as an industry, but definitely in my 25 years. So I'll reach out to Jonathan separately to see how we can make that work. But to sort of raise the profile of the profession really into other areas. including Irish studies, which I wasn't even sure that was a degree until 10 minutes ago.
It turns out it is, yeah. I mean, I think in some ways it's a good moment for us because there is very seldom a day when transport is not in the news.
Absolutely.
If it's not about decarbonisation, it's about bollards and low traffic neighbourhoods and culture wars and the like. And as much as some people might find that a bit of a hostile environment to get involved in, other people I think are quite attracted to the fact that they can make real change and actually deliver change that's immediately identifiable on the street. There's a few more identifiable things in a bollard that ends up down the end of somebody's road. So I think there's definitely some really good opportunities to reach out into the wider public and sing the praises for the profession. And that's certainly something that society wants to do a bit more public facing as we move into next year's programme. I've got a question here from Alex Bennett from JFG Group, who support us, referring back to the parliamentary reception that we did with the APPG for hate crime. And at that session, we had a bit of a debate about women-only carriages on public transport and whether that was a solution or actually, just a sort of symptom of the problem as much as anything else. Was there any perspectives that you had on that particular issue? So a bit of a hot potato.
I can give my personal opinion on it, which is that I think that sometimes when we expect women to change their behaviour, it's putting that onus on them rather than the perpetrator, and that there are probably more effective ways that we can target funding and interventions to make women feel safe than making them change their behaviour.
I think I'll just give a quick example is something we've been referring to closely is in Sweden, for instance, after every bus after 7 p.m. does not just stop at the designated bus stops, but they stop anywhere along the route to ensure that women do walk home safely. So it's not a end of the world massive difference, but it does contribute. So even if we can start thinking about these little steps to make difference in the way you can help people access places, get to where they need to be safely, I think it makes a big difference.
That's interesting. I think I tend to agree with you that we need to change those sort of social views rather than trying to retrofit our environment to something which is actually potentially quite unpleasant. A question that I had for you both. So in your presentation, you spoke about the need to consider this perspective on schemes as they get developed and proposed, but also on which schemes get developed and proposed. And I think your kind of focus was a little bit on the latter, actually, and the fact that we don't necessarily see the schemes that would make the biggest difference come forward because the appraisal system doesn't really give them due weight. Do I understand that correctly? And if you think, what would be the single biggest change that we could bring into the appraisal system to make sure that we are seeing more of these schemes come forward that target these protected characteristics?
Mm-hmm. I think we're starting to already see the change that needs to happen, which is probably a greater focus on the strategic case. I think to help that change move faster, being able to incorporate it into the economic case better would probably also be a huge help. I think at the moment, trying to make the case, particularly for kind of local schemes and for trips that aren't particularly business trips or commuting trips, it's very difficult to make the case for those sometimes in terms of the economics of those schemes. I think increasing the focus on the strategic case is a huge help. And I think if we could better capture the economic benefits of doing some of these things, that would also kind of help us move forward more quickly.
Yeah. And as Emma quite neatly summarised, this isn't a niche agenda. There's millions and millions of people that benefit from this stuff. We just got to get it right. My personal bet, of course, is that actually more devolution is a really good way of doing this. If we can move the issue and make it a priority in local areas and give them the flexibility to apply their funding to whichever scheme they think is important in the local area, then we should see a lot more of these schemes come forward. Would be my hope. There was a very specific question about whether you had any insight into which of the protected characteristics we could really do with having more data about. Are there any particular protected characteristics that you've seen through the analysis that you've done that we actually don't have a decent understanding about some of their challenges?
I will quickly answer to say that I think that LGBT people, we could definitely learn more about their travel habits, but I want to hand over to Sharon because I know she's doing some really interesting work about ethnic minority people as well in their travel.
Yeah, I completely agree, Katie, because so we started looking at the LTDS data and a bit of the other data to understand anything about ethnic minorities, because all we have is a few headline statistics around, say, physical activity, but we just don't have any idea of the fact that you have this intersection of ethnic minority and especially women in ethnic minority groups we just don't have the data on there. So I've been taking some research, undertaking some research to find more data and to gather more data and to understand better how do they travel and perhaps the circumstances of why they travel in the way they travel, which is, I don't think, clearly understood now.
Yeah, that sounds like that would be, that would be really, really valuable. And I think if I add to that, I do think some of the issues around where we see community tensions on public transport in particular, getting behind some of the data of what triggered those tensions. Is it as simple as overcrowding, or is it a design issue that throws people together at a barrier at a certain moment, which could be a trigger for something wider? Those sorts of data, the BTP was saying they're just starting to get into that. And I think that would be really interesting for designers in designing out some of those sparks that can cause wider issues. Excellent. I think let's check. I think we've there's quite a few comments in the chat. I'm sure you'll find interesting to read. I think we've come to the end of the questions though, so that's great. Thank you very much for your time, and thank you for that really interesting piece of research. And can I just say that was a particularly slick presentation? I get the impression maybe you've done that before. It was absolutely excellent to see, and given the technology issues we had at the beginning, it was good to end on that note as well. So thank you, Jacob's team, and
thank you, Mark.
To also thank obviously Emma and Jessica for joining us at the start. I'd like to thank the sponsors for making this event possible, Brogan and the team at PTRC for all the support you give in the background and all the way through getting us to this point. JFG is our professional communications team that's supported us on Transport Planning Day 2021 and indeed all previous Transport Planning Days. And of course, I'd like to thank you to all our members. Thank you very much for continuing to support the society and actually increasing numbers joining the society. Obviously, without you, we really couldn't do any of this sort of stuff. So thank you. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon. You can continue celebrating Transport Planning Day, and if you intend to do so, possibly at a pub quiz, as seems to be quite popular, please do pop yourself on social media with the hashtag TPDay2021, and we look forward to seeing you all at Transport Planning Day 2022. Thanks all. Have a lovely evening. Cheers, Brogan.
Thanks, Mark.